Lieutenant Governor is offering 19 to 25-year-olds the chance to immerse themselves in the work of Government House for a day. Participants will experience the breadth of Sir John Lorimer's work, typically through meetings, visits to island events and the day-to-day work of the Government House team. We'll hear later from Tony Brown on how the Lieutenant Governor interacts with government and Parliament, as well as Sir John's first shadowing guest, Emily Bridson. But first, Sir John Lorimer tells us what this shadowing programme is all about.
I've called it a shadowing programme, and it's really giving an opportunity for young people to spend a day with me, to see what I do, how I do it, the people I meet, the meetings I go to, the visits I go to, and just try and give them a snapshot of it's a day in the life of the Lieutenant Governor, with the aim, I suppose, of better informing them and for them to be able to tell people what I do, but also to see how what they do sort of fits in. So give them a sort of their perspective on what I do and how they connect, I suppose. And
there's a plan for is it over 6 months? One person a month, is that the plan?
The plan is a person a month, and they could be from any. They could work for the government, but I'm also keen we get people from business, and really, between the age of sort of 19 and 25, just as a sort of a guide.
Just a bit younger than you then.
A wee bit, yes, and really to open it out to. So we've got, I think, for the first 6 months of the year, we've got volunteers for that. And I hope that we'll be able to continue if it's a success and if we get the right kind of feedback.
So then, I suppose the question is, what has the Governor ever done for us? Which everyone will have their own take as to what it is that you do, but you probably do a lot more than people realise.
Yes, yeah. What do you do for us? Well, right from the start of moving into this appointment, taking on as the appointment, what I wanted to do was to prove through actions and words, and also what Lady Lorimer does, because I see it very much as a team, that the role of Lieutenant Governor is still relevant in the 21st century. Because inevitably you're going to get people saying, well, why do we need this? It's old-fashioned, old traditional, why do we need it? Well, we've got it. So I want to prove why it's still relevant and why it does add value. And as many of your listeners will know, there's three main areas of the role. There's the constitutional aspect, which is working with Tynwald, and one aspect is granting royal assent to laws. Second one is ceremonial, and I suppose that's a good example of that is Tynwald Day or Remembrance Day. But the third area, which is probably about 70% of what we do, is the community role, and that's getting out and visiting organisations, anything from a department of the government to schools or businesses or associations, or indeed in any gathering, if people ask, and to communicate with them and to engage with them and find out what they do. Often it's about saying thank you to people for doing what they've been doing. Often it's just trying to understand where people fit in, and where, with that information, is trying to join dots and help other organisers. Well, are you aware of these other people doing this? This might help. So it's trying to sort of get a good understanding of the totality of what goes on in the Isle of Man and help connect people.
Is there also a kind of an ambassadorial role to this, in as much as obviously any dignitaries that come to the Isle of Man often they end up at Government House with the relevant ministers alongside of them?
There is that, and I think if an ambassador came here, for instance, they would tend to stay here. and we help facilitate their visit, working with the government. For instance, when there's courses being run here which involves international students, like the Small Countries Financial Management Programme, we would do a reception here. And again, that Government House is a wonderful place where you can bring people together and help them engage and hopefully to end up doing business together. And sometimes Government House is the only sort of bit of the Isle of Man that people see apart from offices, and they get the chance to come here, meet other people, see the wonderful place we have here, but also get a feel for the Isle of Man, which is great.
When you took on this role, did you expect everything that has happened, or were there things that surprised you about the role?
I don't, not immediately. I think initially when you come into this role, you have a sort of a rough idea of what to expect, and you know that you're not going to know everything when you come in, so you sort of absorb it all. And occasionally there are some things you go, gosh, I wasn't expecting that. And it's not because it's the Isle of Man, or it's because the job is always providing surprises, and who you meet and the more you understand about the island, you more go, wow, I didn't realise this was happening here. And I think that's one of the great things that, and one of the privileges as well that the governor has, Lieutenant Governor has, is that you can go across the island, can go all around the island, and you can visit virtually anything. We've been very lucky when we sort of ring up, or the team ring up and say, can the governor come and visit? Everyone has always been very welcoming. And you're permanently discovering gems of things, that activities or organisations or business that are going on the island that probably nobody was really aware of. And if you can help advertise that and advocate for them, then that's great. I mean, I'll give you an example, but last week I was at the Public Records Office. And the things that they're doing there in terms of preserving our history and the history of the island and of public bodies is fantastic. And I would advocate for them, because I think it's really important. History is really important. Understanding what has happened in the past is really important to hold on to that. But if I can help that in some way, in terms of organisations, carrying out their aims and objectives, then by visiting and then advocating on their behalf is definitely part of the role.
Tynwald, over much of the 20th century, but particularly possibly the last half of the 20th century, saw quite a lot of constitutional reform. You alluded to it yourself, that perhaps the role by some is seen as archaic. What specific elements of what you do are essential in some form as far as the future is concerned?
And I think that's a good question, and I think it's interesting how the role of the Lieutenant Governor has changed in the last 100-odd years. And I think if you look back to Lord Raglan, back into 1902 to 1919, after him, and I think everyone would admit he probably wasn't the most popular of lieutenant governors. There was a man who had all the levers. He was effectively lieutenant governor, chief minister, president of Tynwald, First Deemster and Treasury Minister, and probably a few more as well, and all the committees reported into him. And I think you can see from when he left in 1919, the changes started happening, slowly and surely, until we get to where we are now. But I think foremost in my responsibilities, I represent the Lord of Man, and I am the King's representative on island. And so when I am attending an official function, I am there on his behalf. And I think that's very important. I think the the connection. We mustn't forget the connection that we have with His Majesty, and that's who I represent. And Government House is the resident of the representative of the Lord of Man and the head of state. And I think there are certain aspects of the role which I think are important. I think to the royal assent and that procedure and for laws. I think representing him on Tynwald Day, as a national day, the fact that someone there is representing the Lord of Man. And there are various other events. For instance, we have the Holocaust service on Sunday, and I think the fact that I go along to that is really important. I'm representing him, something which he regards as important, and I'm there on his behalf. And I think you could look across the calendar or the annual program. There are a number of key events, key activities, which it's entirely appropriate that the Lieutenant Governor is there representing the Lord of Man.
I'm guessing you don't have King on speed dial in terms of a direct line through. How does that communication with the royal family actually work?
Clearly, there's staff level stuff which we can do. So the team here at Government House, I don't know if they're in speed dial, but they have opposite numbers that they would deal with it in quite a regular basis. If I need to do it, I would work through the King's sort of immediate team. And if I was in London and needed to see him, I have no doubt that time would be made available for that. And I'm absolutely desperate to get him to come and visit the Isle of Man. I know he wants to come, and that's just a question of programming and trying to find a date that will fit everybody. But I mean, I think that the relationship that Government House has with Buckingham Palace is good. It's the channels are proven to routinely, and so I don't think if I needed to get advice or direction, I don't think that would be difficult to achieve.
And then the other thing, because you're kind of the go-between between the sovereign and Parliament and government, indeed. How often do you get to speak to the likes of, President of Tynwald, Speaker of the House of Keys, Chief Minister?
It's about every 6 weeks is what we tend to do. But because we're meeting quite often in events across the island, and but I have sort of standard meetings where I would speak with the President. In fact, we had one today, a meeting today that Emily attended with me, and we would either do it here or we would do it in the in government buildings. And the same with the Chief Minister, First Deemster, Attorney General, various people. And this is really helpful for me to understand what is happening. Clearly, I'm not there to provide advice or certainly not direction, but it's to understand, and it's really helpful to me. And I think one of the things I can do as a sort of from my perspective, because I get around the island and I meet people, there is an element of saying, well, I've seen this or heard this and whatever, and that may be helpful to ministers or whatever. But just to reinforce, I'm certainly not providing direction or guidance or necessarily advice, but it's sharing information and helping me better understand what's happening on the island.
I'm not sure whether your role in the military would have got you, allowed you to be familiar with biting your tongue and not saying things when you, when perhaps you might, or perhaps the position that you'd reached, you were used to telling people how it is and getting things done. Is it frustrating sometimes when I guess you're not going to be able to answer that question.
You're absolutely right. I'm not going to answer that. But I think my in the last 10 years that I was in the army, I was doing roles which inevitably meant speaking to ministers, politicians, but ministers, particularly in the Ministry of Defence and the Foreign Office and other departments like that. And so during that time, you start to learn what their requirements and also their perspective and what they're looking at. And if you can understand that, then some of the issues that arise and particularly when I was running sort of operations across the world, you start to understand their perspective. And I think that's been helpful for being here. That not everyone is going to look at the island or indeed the world from your perspective. And it helps to just to understand that everyone's always coming from a slightly different angle.
And I guess Emily is coming from a slightly different angle. What have you learned from Emily today?
Well, that's always the credit. Now, when I started this shadow program when I was in the army, that was the key question I'd always ask at the end of the day. First of all, what have you learned from it? And in the army, the people that used to shadow me tended to be in my headquarters or something, so that they were familiar with what I was doing. And so I used to say, what have you learnt from what you've seen, what I do? And it tended to be, the breadth of the issues that I was dealing with, and secondly, sometimes the depth that I had to go into, the detail. And that the reason I needed to have the details because the politicians who I was reporting to wanted the detail. Whether they really needed it is another matter, but that was the experience. So it's the breadth and the depth. But the other thing that I wanted them to get out of the experience was how does what they do contribute to what I was doing, and how do we how does it fit together? Now, Emily hasn't reached the end of her day with me, so I haven't asked her the question yet. But I hope that what she would think is using the sort of the fact that I have this constitutional, ceremonial, and community role, and she's seen a bit of particularly the community role, a little bit the constitutional, but mostly the community role. She will understand actually how there is still a relevance in the role of Lieutenant Governor, and actually it does add value in terms of meeting people, understanding what they're doing, and so kind of joining the dots.
Which was a great answer. I'm not sure it's quite the question I asked. The question specifically, though, was, did you learn anything from Emily today?
Well, of course, because you're sitting and spending time with someone, and we were sitting in the car chatting on the way, and inevitably, one of the things I learnt from Emily is everyone has a part to play. She works in the government, she works in Crown and External Relations, and inevitably that has an impact on what I do. So some of the things she's been working on in her job inevitably have an impact on me. So it's sort of understanding how everyone in an organisation, they all contribute to this sort of the overall output. And that's very much the case in terms of Emily and me. We're just at sort of slightly different levels and different ends of the same organisation.
So Emily is the first of your guests, when we get to the end of the year, what do you hope will have been achieved by the exercise?
Well, I hope that we'll have 12 young people who would have benefited from the experience of spending a day with the Lieutenant Governor and seeing him in action and his team in action, and to be able to sort of understand what they're trying to achieve as a team, and also the benefit and the value that the organisation and the individual appointment is adding, and also just a better understanding, because I think, so going back to one of your former questions, one of your earlier questions is, I think there is probably a little bit of a misconception of what the Lieutenant Governor does. And we've tried to open up people's understanding, opening up Government House to more people, getting out and being more transparent. We have a Facebook site now, which wasn't the case a couple of years ago, and just try and show people where both my wife and I, what we spend our time doing and how we try and add value.
That was Lieutenant Governor Sir John Lorimer. Next, we hear from his first shadowing guest, Emily Bridson.
My name's Emily Bridson and I work in the Crown and External Relations team.
And Emily, you've spent a day with Sir John Lorimer, the Lieutenant Governor. What did you think the Lieutenant Governor did before you've spent this day with him?
I didn't know an awful lot about the Lieutenant Governor before I came, to be honest. Kind of knew more about the ceremonial role with Tynwald Day and the kind of more ambassadorial style and the constitutional relationship. But I didn't have any kind of appreciation for quite how much the role involves. I didn't know an awful lot.
And I mean, everyone sees, everyone who goes to Tynwald sees the Lieutenant Governor sat on top of Tynwald Hill, but perhaps it's those other elements. I mean, occasionally I suppose you'd see the Lieutenant Governor out at do's, events and things, but was there anything in relation to the kind of political role or the I'm trying to think of the best way of putting it, that kind of conduit between the sovereign, the Lord of Man, and Parliament and the legislature that perhaps you weren't aware of, or that's interesting?
I found it really interesting just how much the role can bring people together, especially across different parts of government and within Tynwald. And I think it's a testament to His Excellency himself in how much he cares about how people can be brought together and how we can work more collaboratively. And if there's things that people across government can do to make working better for the people of the Isle of Man, that's kind of his approach to the role and what he wants to use the role to do.
Is the role, because again we heard there from Sir John that he that some people might view the role as a bit archaic now and anachronistic, I suppose. From what you've seen, would you say that is the case, perhaps in terms of your limited knowledge before you've had this day with the Governor, the Lieutenant Governor? Was that maybe part of your thinking before?
I didn't have too much of a view on it before, but I think just I've been fortunate to see such a variety of roles that he's played today, visiting a school, visiting a government department, speaking with Mr. President of Tynwald. I think seeing that impact that he has across the community and the way he engages with people and listens to people, and again just is trying to bring people together and get that joining the dots sense across the community, particularly with the Isle of Man, where the community is so close-knit and brings such an important feel. I would say that even though that wasn't my position before, it certainly isn't my position now, and it's given me a greater understanding of just what the role can do.
Because again, part of your role now is with the external relations team in government. Obviously, Lieutenant Governor has an important role to play there too. But what are the kinds of things that you're engaged with in terms of external relations? What does that do, just in case people aren't aware of what that team does?
I've been fortunate to work across a lot of different functions in external relations since I've been there, but we split into a couple of strands. So we have engagement, which is with the UK and further afield, but primarily with the Chief Minister, and engaging with Westminster and Whitehall. We work across trade, which is particularly with Europe and in Brussels, and then we do international development as well.
So lots of exciting things to do then. And do you think the experience that you've had today is going to help in terms of that role?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from my particular role within government, I've met lots of different people today, and kind of made different connections and networks. But just that understanding of how to engage with people and how to work across different groups and communities and within government, and what we can all do to help each other will certainly be very useful. And also, it's just been a great day to meet more people from our directorate actually, and kind of get to meet the team and see what Government House really do.
The question, I suppose, that Sir John Lorimer will be most interested in is what have you actually learned from him today?
I've learned an awful lot and been really kind of refreshed by his approach to not just the role but to life, and to work in terms of kind of aiming high. And if you don't quite reach that aim, that's better than if you'd aimed lower and made 100%. You know, if you aim for 100% and you get 80, that's better than aiming for 70% and reaching 70%. And just kind of getting started and then joining the dots. So if everyone is doing their best, how can we help each other? And just that really positive, pragmatic approach to what it is we do, because I think, especially on a small island, we're all doing our best, but it's easy sometimes to feel stuck, and actually just refreshing your approach and really being practical and optimistic about it has been really great.
And finally then, what would you say to anyone who might be contemplating shadowing the Lieutenant Governor for a day? Have you got any advice or suggestions?
I'd absolutely say just to go for it. It's been a fantastic day. The team are so incredibly welcoming. His Excellency and Lady Lorimer have both been incredibly welcoming as well. It's been great, and I've just seen such a diverse variety of what the role includes. You know, like I said, we've been to a school, met a government department, been within Government House, met the team. And it's just really opened my eyes to what the role does, and just kind of all the different elements of community that you wouldn't necessarily see in one day, and people that you wouldn't meet all in the same day. There's a reception this evening for the Royal British Legion, which I'm really, really excited to be able to witness and to celebrate with those people. So yeah, I'd just say go for it. I kind of have an idea about where I'd like to go with my career, at least for the moment, but especially if you wouldn't necessarily know where you'd like to go, you just get exposed to so much and so many different opportunities and people to meet. It's a fantastic opportunity, and I'd really recommend anyone that's interested should go for it.
And I know I did say finally, but another question has popped into my head. You said that one of the thing you learned was actually aim high, and then if you don't quite make it, at least you've got quite high, as opposed to aiming for 70% and getting there. Is it too early for you to say how your personal aims have changed as a result of this?
I probably need a few days to kind of reflect on it, and it's an approach I've tried to have in my life anyway. But yeah, I think it's always good to be reminded of aiming high, and kind of a reminder of what's out there. There is a world beyond the Isle of Man, and as much as I think the Isle of Man is a fantastic place, it's always good within external relations to kind of be aware of what else is out there and kind of just expose yourself to that and think more broadly.
That was Emily Bridson from the Crown and External Relations team, who was Sir John Lorimer's shadowing guest a few weeks ago. Tony Brown held a close relationship with Lieutenant Governors past, You would have had quite a lot of contact with the Lieutenant Governor during your time in those roles.
Yes, I did, and my first time started when I was chairman of the Government Property Trustees, which was when the board system worked, so that's pre-1986. And then after that, all things changed because the Council of Ministers came into being, and a considerable amount of the responsibilities with the Lieutenant Governor were transferred to the Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers. So that distanced things quite a lot, really, from that point of view. As Speaker, my connection with the Chief Minister... As Speaker, my connection with the Lieutenant Governor was actually limited because, of course, in theory, the House of Keys is a separate entity, and in its own right, it's sovereign in that sense. And, of course, the Lieutenant Governor, for example, is not allowed into the House of Keys unless he's invited in by the Speaker and the House. So he can't just turn up like he can in Tynwald and watch proceedings. And that's a deliberate separation between the elected branch and the executive in that sense. So my contact with him was really ceremonial more than anything else. When I became Chief Minister, of course, it's a different role altogether, because the Lieutenant Governor and the Chief Minister are really the principal representatives of the Isle of Man government, Lieutenant Governor to the Crown, and the Chief Minister, who in terms is a Minister of the Crown within the Isle of Man, as are all the other ministers, has a separate role again to play. And as Chief Minister, I used to have a weekly meeting with the Lieutenant Governors that were there during my time, so that I could really just bring them up to date with what was going on, chat about things in general that were of interest to us, and so on. And of course, the roles were different. I mean, as Chief Minister and as a Minister, I was 15 years a Minister. Of course, we were very active in the community, giving speeches, making presentations, taking an interest in what was going on around the island in areas of our responsibility. And the Governor was slightly distanced in terms of, no disrespect to the position, but it was a different role. And that was important for us to have that differentiation under our Constitution, because then it stops any confusion basically between what the role of the Governor is and what the role of ministers are within the Isle of Man.
In terms of that role, then, I mean, that conversation that you would have as Chief Minister, why is it necessary, I suppose, for the Chief Minister to be having such conversations with the Lieutenant Governor?
I think mainly because constitutionally the Lieutenant Governor, is responsible for the good government of the Isle of Man. And of course, don't forget, he can dissolve the House of Keys if he finds that there was a real issue that caused a problem in the community, and it was, it would be major stuff. But he has that power under the law. And therefore, I think it's very important that the Chief Minister is able to at least keep the Lieutenant Governor up to speed with what's going on. He does receive all the Council Ministers' papers and agendas anyway, and the minutes, so he knows in detail what ministers know. But I think it's more the one-to-one discussion, which most of the meetings lasted 3/4 an hour to an hour, and that was it. Really just to bring up to speed, and also on occasions asking the Governor if we were having problems with the UK, could he try and make some representation for us, because he was, again, at a higher level. And especially if we did have a difficulty, which wasn't very often once we brought the ministerial system into being, if we did have a difficulty with a UK department. And if there was an issue, the Lieutenant Governor, whoever it was always happy to do that. I think the difference is that, the roles are quite distinctive. There's very limited roles now where the Lieutenant Governor plays a role within the government system, and they're called Governor and Council matters, where the Council of Ministers will make a decision, and then under the law it goes to the Lieutenant Governor. Only specific decisions. This is what they call Governor in Council, and he then has to either endorse it or return it and say no, he's not happy. And it's a safeguard for the public, really, to make sure that the democratic system is protecting the public interest. And the same happens in the UK. There are certain things that the UK Cabinet make decisions on, and they have to be referred to the King for him to basically do the same exercise.
For most of the 20th century, there had been a fair amount of constitutional reform. The last sort of, I suppose, 10 years of the 20th century and much of this century, there hasn't really been an awful lot of change. Why do you think that is? Is it perhaps we've got a perfect system that doesn't need any further reform?
No, I think it's because the members of Tynwald at the moment have no interest in the Constitution in that aspect. They don't seem to give the impression that they're interested in any advancement in how the island moves forward and takes greater control of its affairs. So I think that's quite sad, really, because we did, from 1986 through to when I left, we made major constitutional changes. For example, in my time, we were the first. We introduced a system where the Chief Minister, the President of Tynwald and the First Deemster interviewed the candidates for the post of Lieutenant Governor. And we would then make a recommendation to the Ministry of Justice, which would then be passed on to the King, or in those days it was the Queen, for endorsement if they were happy that we processed it properly. So that they were major advancements and lots of small ones. I mean, there's hundreds of little changes that were made in the sort of 86 through to 96, really, where the governor was involved, and these were transferred rightly to those people who were elected, who represent the people. And it was us growing up, I suppose, is the best way to put it. We were developing and growing into our own being. And I do think it's not in the island's best interest that that's actually ground, or seems to have ground to a halt. We need to continue to move forward. Ministers and the Chief Minister and the Council of Ministers need to take on, and can take on, extra responsibilities to represent the people of the Isle of Man, because they are accountable to the people of the Isle of Man, and that's the principle of a good democracy. So I think this hiatus at the moment is not really a great thing. Constitutional changes aren't quick. They take time. Some of them require changes in the law. Some of them require just changes in what we call orders. But some of them require long negotiation because, they're important to how the island exists in the world today. And we certainly found that during my time, and I think it's fair to say during the time of my predecessors as Chief Ministers, we found the UK government very supportive of us making more advancement in controlling our own affairs. And I do think the Isle of Man needs to give maybe a bit more priority to that.
Of course, when you entered the House of Keys and Tynwald, the governor effectively was the president of Tynwald, and during your time that changed. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, don't forget, I went into the House of Keys in 1981, and it's only about 10 or 15 years before that the governor still held the purse strings of the Isle of Man and basically therefore governed the Isle of Man, and those changes were made prior to me going in. There was a push in the 1980s, and we were a bit tight for money. We didn't have much money coming in, to move forward to a system where we now have a ministerial system, because what it meant is that the ministers are ultimately responsible for the actions of their department, and the term hire and fire comes into mind, and it gave the Chief Minister proper authority over that. So we did move on a lot from that. As far as the reason for it, I think it was because the mood was right. I think there was a lot of frustration that government was basically running around in circles. This is the old style of government where it was a board system. We had something like 24 boards of Tynwald. There was a chairman of executive council with no power. The boards did their own thing. They were all autonomous and they were part of Tynwald. So we didn't even have a proper democratic system where there was the separation between the executive, the parliament and the judiciary. We now do have that, albeit that members of the executive sit within the parliament, but that's the British system. So basically, these were massive changes that improved the way the island moved forward. And, the proof is in the pudding. I mean, we were made major advancements in terms of the income into the island, how we governed ourselves, the provisions we provided. As you remember, Miles Walker is here now, and the Council Minister time came up with the policy of quality of life because we thought that was important to improve the quality of life of the people of the Isle of Man, and to make sure people, had enough money to live on, that life was good here. And I think we did succeed on that. I think at the moment, that's not quite as obvious as it was. I think it's fair to say a lot of people are struggling because their incomes aren't adequate for the charges they're getting put against them. Many, I have to say, which are put against them by government. I think there's a bit of a struggle at the moment, and things might be a bit tighter than they used to be, but they were tighter in the 80s. We've got far better resources now, and a greater income coming in than we used to have. And yes, sensible decisions have to be made, but I think you can overplay the issue of we need to save. Government is about service. It's there to serve the people. What you then have to do is prioritise how you fund that service. And I think at the moment there's a lot of concern that it's maybe a bit too far one way, which is not helping people live a reasonable or good quality of life in the Isle of Man.
There seems to be a mood across the world at the moment for change. Some view it perhaps as going back to glory days, perhaps. I guess the glory days for the Isle of Man, you'd have to go back 1,000 years to the time of Godred Crovan. But is there a danger that democracy, liberal democracy like we have in the Isle of Man, may be threatened by this kind of mood that people are just tired of the existing political system and they want something different?
Well, I think everybody will look at this differently, but I would take the view that, the Isle of Man has been very fortunate that we have a system of democracy where anyone can stand. You don't have to be in a political party. What you need is the vote from the people who you're trying to get the vote from, and if you get the majority, you end up becoming a member. And the authority that members of the House of Keys have within the Keys and within Tynwald, the UK parliamentarians don't have anything like it. They have systems to block them and cause problems for them. In the Isle of Man, members are free, as long as they comply with standing orders, to put forward anything that they feel is of importance to their constituents or to the island. And I think at the moment, Tynwald struggles a bit with that. I think it's not as effective as it could be to hold the executive to account. And sometimes, you have to move forward with things that might not get any support. But what Tynwald does, it provides an opportunity for a member to raise an issue and have it debated, or at least put the case that might fail. But it means that the public knows somebody's bothering about what it is that's causing them a concern. Now, that doesn't mean you go with anything. Clearly, you have to judge what's the right thing to do. But the political voice has to be heard for people to have faith in democracy. And I think if that's muted, then that's when people get frustrated with what's going on. And so it is important for members, and I'm sure they do, to be aware that really it's not just about asking a question or just, plodding along. It's about actually trying to make a difference, and those differences can impact on how we all live.
You mentioned there about the need for continuation of constitutional reform. I suppose people might be wondering, well, what actually needs to change? We have that clear relationship with the Crown now through the Governor. There doesn't appear to be a mood across the island for us to go completely independent. The systems seem to work okay. We often hear whenever constitutional reform is mentioned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. What is broke?
Well, I think I'm not in there now. I've been out quite a number of years. But it's not just about what's broke, it's what can we make better. And lots of the constitutional issues are actually very small issues. They're just the governor's involved, where now you could take him out of being involved because it's more appropriate for it to be a matter for the Chief Minister or the Council Ministers or the Governor in Council. And there's still lots of them there, hundreds of them, that could be changed that just make a slight difference. And it's a difference in how it's administered, how it works. But the principle is it comes into the hands of those who are elected to represent the people. That's the difference. So there's likely to be, hundreds of those things. We did hundreds in the 80s and 90s, and there's bound to be more. I think that, members are there to learn, as I did. If you're interested, find out what's going on. Make changes where it's necessary, not just for the sake of it. I mean, that's nonsense, making change just for the sake of it. You make change because it's actually going to better the quality of life for the people of the Isle of Man, and it's going to give the Isle of Man greater opportunities than it has at the moment. I was always of the view our greatest weapon we have is legislation, and members have to be able to and should use our ability to make legislation to benefit the Isle of Man. Not just copy what the UK is doing because they're doing it, but to actually do things that are slightly different, agreeing in international law, agreeing with human rights, but actually can make the Isle of Man a more attractive place to do business. And the key to that is often the legislation. And if you do that, and we've done it over the years, that makes a big difference. That creates opportunities, it creates a climate that's more beneficial. And whether we like it or not, the Isle of Man is in competition with the world. We have to make a climate that can benefit the Isle of Man, and that means making a climate that's acceptable internationally. And there is lots of room for doing that. You can make changes, you can introduce systems that will make it better. And another thing, importantly, is if you make legislation, change legislation, you can actually reduce bureaucracy if you want to. There's all sorts of things the legislation enables you to do. We're not a local authority, we're a government, we're a legislature. The House of Keys makes law, and those things are very important to us. And of course, importantly to individual members is it's so easy for an individual member of the House of Keys to introduce a private member's bill, whereas in the UK it's virtually impossible. And, if it's the right thing, it'll get through. If it's not, members, rightly, by a majority, will throw it out. But sometimes you have to test the system to see if it works.
And effectively, you need 13 votes in Keys to get your private member's bill through, and then 5 votes in Legco. In terms, because we are starting to run out of time now, in terms of the title of the Lieutenant Governor, there have been comments in the past that perhaps that's a misleading title, and there could be a better title found. But as we discovered, I seem to remember we were on the committee, it's easy enough to recognise that the title may no longer be appropriate. It's much more difficult to find a replacement.
Well, yes, and I mean, I have no problem with the Isle of Man having a Lieutenant Governor, a Crown appointment, while we are a Crown dependency. There's a reason for that. That's fine. Not a problem at all. What matters is what their role is, what responsibilities they have, what influence they have over our life, and what they do. We looked at what we call the Island Commissioner. That Canada and Australia have different titles for different things. Even in the UK, they have them. They have people who do different roles at even local level in the UK. And our view was, I was Speaker at the time, and we were looking at this issue, was that we needed to look to move forward by changing the name of the Lieutenant Governor, because he now doesn't govern. And that was the principle of it, really. And it was not to be disrespectful at all. And in fact, we know that if we'd have got that legislation through the Crown, we know we would have given royal assent to it, because it wasn't offensive. It was just a change in title. Unfortunately, it failed. Eventually, it went through a bit of a process by the time it failed. But the whole principle is still correct. And one day, maybe the Isle of Man will find a title that is acceptable. If it retains the title Lieutenant Governor, that's fine. It's not an issue. What matters is, what does the government do? What is the government's role? How far is it able to govern the Isle of Man within a democratic system? And I think that's what's important. But an important part of democracy is that those who are in authority are answerable to the people. And I do have a concern with the amount of bodies that are being set up where people who are not elected, have never sought public office, are now being appointed to bodies to run the Isle of Man, and I think that's not a great thing.
That was former Chief Minister Tony Brown. So what do you think? Whether you're an ardent royalist or a determined Republican, it's difficult to argue that the Lieutenant Governor doesn't fulfil an important constitutional role. Is there a need for further reform? Is the title of Lieutenant Governor a little misleading, bearing in mind the occupant ceased having direct involvement in government several decades ago? Is the shadowing programme worthwhile? Will Emily Bridson and those that follow her gain valuable experience from this shadowing exercise? Let me know your thoughts on the programme by contacting Phil Gorn at manxradio.com and get in touch if you have any ideas for future shows. Don't forget this programme is available as a podcast on Manx Radio's website. I'm Phil Gorn. Thanks for listening.